Hey everyone, Dog Skeleton here, and today I'd like to share with you all how esports threaten the physical sports market. Now, up until recently, arguably the late 90s when StarCraft came around, esports were basically non-existent. They weren't really a big thing. Even with StarCraft 1, it wasn't really that big. It was a big deal in Korea. But even for someone like myself, esports didn't really get on the scene as something to be taken seriously until games like League of Legends and StarCraft 2 came around, where the graphics are much better, the way they're able to present things is a lot better, having those custom GUI interfaces, and most importantly, having the bandwidth on the internet to be able to support it. From this point forward, until something drastically changes the world of entertainment again, esports are going to be a real thing that people watch, and it's competing with regular or physical sports for views. Now, the audiences might not be exactly the same, where people who actually watch esports are typically very geeky gamers, and then people who watch regular sports can be just about anybody, honestly, at this point. But they both definitely fill that niche of wanting to watch someone else who's much better at a game than you are, be able to perform and show off their skills and compete in these major tournaments where epic battles clash between both sides. So assuming trends continue along the current path, esports are just going to become more popular as we get better internet connections, better graphics, better ways of presenting material, and sponsors who take the whole system more seriously and will put more money forward to fund all of these major tournaments and games. So now for the meat of the video, what advantages do esports have over physical sports? Well, I would argue that the first one is that gamers are already online, as opposed to regular consumers of sports, which can be just about anybody. And I would say that the average person does know how to use things like Facebook right now, but they're not exactly gurus at using the web. They probably don't know about like browser plugins, how to build websites, how to use the terminal for all of these different operating systems like Windows and Linux. And the thing is, the more technology proficient you become, the better you're going to be at doing things like setting reminders for all of these events that are going on, knowing where to look on the internet, on sites like Reddit, finding out where and when all of these tournaments are taking place. For a television program that's showing a sport, you generally know, okay, football comes on this time of the week, at this time on this channel. But if you want to find new sources of videos to watch, tournaments to watch, then you need to be able to use the internet in order to research and find out information. And I would argue that gamers, compared to the average person, are significantly better at doing that. Second reason, esports generally have a lot less overhead than physical sports do. With physical sports, you have to have a location, and there are a lot of elements that go into that, including renting out the place, especially if it's a big stadium, having your audience get to the location, gas time costs, and providing snacks, food, other sidelines entertainment. Especially at the smaller end of the scale for amateur teams, I do think it's a lot harder to get some kind of small event going. Whereas if you contrast that to small esports tournaments, you can basically just get 20 players into a room, have them all sign up on some internet thread. Once they're in an online chat room or Skype or whatever at the specified time, then you just basically stream to Twitch TV, and you're good to go without really paying anything to get it started aside from advertising costs in the prize pool. Now, of course, if you've seen stuff like professional League of Legends tournaments, the World Championships, where they go rent out stadiums that are, I don't know if they were actually using a football stadium, but pretty much as big as a football stadium if it wasn't, with the same level of production, having music. I think they had Imagine Dragons playing, and lots of other stuff that goes into that at the highest level. But there's so much that goes on beneath that that is a lot easier to set up than going and starting a league for a sport, which involves getting a place, having time allotted to you for that place, which means you have to get permission to use it, and all those other things that go into establishing sports events. One of the best examples of where this really shows, where these online video game tournaments really just excel at their simplicity in getting audiences over physical events, would probably be the Hearthstone tournaments that aren't necessarily sponsored by Blizzard, but players like Amaz, they get together, they have sponsors, and they'll go and commentate them, but they do everything online, and they still get tens of thousands of viewers. The third advantage, which is also something that has really contributed to the popularity of video games in general, is that video games are just easier to and are often more frequently shared, especially if you go on sites like YouTube. You know that there are hundreds of thousands. No, really, it's millions. I don't have a direct statistic, but I'm sure it's in the millions of people who are posting and uploading video game content, sharing with their friends, sharing with the YouTube community, quote unquote, and all these other people who come to their channels and are able to see this content. And then when they see the content, it kind of inspires them to want to play or try the same kind of strategy that some other people were doing. If you contrast that to what the average person might do for amateur football or baseball games or basketball or whatever is going on, it's probably going to be more like a mom or a dad taking a camera out, recording the match, and if they are a really tech-savvy person, they might upload that to YouTube, but I think more often than not, it's more like put it in the family member memories, DVDs selection, or back in the day it would have been VHS. And if you compare that to gaming, it's so easy to do things with gaming. You can literally just hit the stream button on open broadcasting software, or you can use the PlayStation 4's share button. The quality of each average video might not be the best, but there's definitely a lot of content, and when you multiply that by millions of videos, that does make a huge impact on anybody browsing the internet. No one is going to go on YouTube and not see at least one video of gaming at some point in time. So number 4, without getting too political, physical sports currently depend on government subsidies in a lot of cases. And I'm going to link down to some statistics on exactly how much money goes into these stadiums from public funds, public taxes. But if you compare that to video games and video game companies, it's a very much free market right now. The people who are paying the money for these events are basically sponsors. As far as I know, at least in the US, there's no video game company like Riot Games or Blizzard that's getting a giant government check to keep one of their stadiums operational. And why that's a big deal is that the organizations who do take the subsidies, like NFL, are going to have to meet certain regulation requirements to get and keep that money. Basically, if they want the money, they gotta follow the rules, right? So at least at some level, there's going to be lobbyists and other groups of people who are trying to make these sports or keep them the way they are or push them towards certain directions which might be good for the individuals or the groups, but not necessarily good for the sport as a whole. Whereas if you contrast that with video games, the company that's profiting and the sport itself are more or less one and the same. League of Legends is a product of Riot Games. And as long as they deliver the traffic to their sponsors, they stay in business and they're happy and they don't really have to deal with all that much government stuff. They can just more or less be like, hey, you want to make a game today? Yeah, let's make a game. Okay, a year later, release the game. Hey, community likes it. Let's hire more people and keep this train going. But when was the last time you saw a major sports organization like the NFL pop up out of nowhere? Okay, point 4, the limits of physical reality. Obviously, physical sports are limited to what you can actually do in the physical world, at least in their current form. Though one day I imagine that physical sports will kind of transform into some hyper-techno-based kind of thing, where we have hologram projections, reverse gravity rooms, and people will probably augment their body not with steroids, but superhuman robot parts. But for right now, it's more or less what you see is what you get. And on television, or even if you're streaming a sport online, you can certainly add in special programming, flashy graphics, and all that other kind of stuff. But the footage of the game itself is always going to be somewhat grounded in reality. It's a photograph, or a video feed, rather, of what is actually happening in reality. And video games have always had that advantage where a programmer can basically create whatever the hell they want, even if it's completely unrealistic, it can never exist, or showing real footage of it would be considered taboo beforehand, like some of the more touchy subjects. But they can also show reality-defying feats as commonplace, and real-world injuries not something that you have to really worry about when it comes to eSports, except for maybe carpal tunnel. That, I'm sure, is a big deal. So my last point, that eSports adapt faster, somewhat ties back into the whole idea that physical sports are tied with the government right now. But it's also just in the nature of how video games are produced. You just have to get a team of developers and designers to start working on a game. They write the software, they create the graphics, they mesh everything together, make sure the servers are up and running, And then you publish it to the community, and if people do like it because it's a quality product, then it can grow very fast, like League of Legends did, like Hearthstone did. But then how many sports do you actually see that are being created that really take off and become popular? And the thing about video games is that the companies that effectively are the game, since they are the ones that produce it and run it on their servers, have every incentive to make changes each and every month, or at least every few months, the patch notes you see, the changes they come out with, or the new characters that come unlocked, so that they can keep the games updated, so that they can keep new players coming in. And when what's good for the game is also what's good for the one and only company that's managing that game, then they have every incentive to go ahead and make the game better, to make the changes as necessary to improve upon the game. But then if you contrast that with physical games like football, you might have the game itself, football, and then you have major leagues, even the biggest ones, like the NFL, who are major players in the football universe, but they can't exactly just go and change the rules so easily. There's other vested interests, there are other leagues out there, and then if you just decided to change things, then that would really upset the global community. Whereas with video games, you can pretty much get away with it. As long as the changes are good, the only people who are really going to care are going to be the viewers, the players, and then the sponsors, which want you to drive traffic to their websites. Which really means you got to satisfy the player base, which is also the viewers. So you have one group of people, and what those people want to see is the game be really good. Another way of putting it would just be to think about how quickly changes come to a major sports, physical sports, I mean, and then compare it to software development teams, how they just test things. Once they have it in a good state, they push it out with a patch, and then immediately it's spread across all players everywhere across the globe, and that's how the game is played now. It's a hell of a lot faster and more efficient, right? Well, that shows how esports are faster at responding to the market. By no means am I trying to infer here that video games will eliminate physical sports from the marketplace and that they'll just all die off and no one will ever play football again. Although watching geeks mentally battle it out by having excellent control of their mice and keyboards, physical sports redundantly have that physical element that you can't capture with video games. I do in fact anticipate that people will somewhat live in awe of those who actually dedicate their bodies, push themselves to the height of human physical limits for at least some time longer. And it's true that there is some overlap between the potential audiences of both sports, physical sports, and esports. But the world is certainly compatible with the existence of both. That's self-evident. You can see right now that they're coexisting. You have people who watch football, you have people who watch League of Legends, and then you have people who watch both. However, that said, in the long run, physical sports are going to have to adapt to the changing technological world if they want to stay relevant, and not only in competition with esports, but also the other physical sports that do go out of their way to make new sources of entertainment by integrating those new technologies. So I've been Dark Skeleton, thanks for sticking around to the end. I know this is a little bit different than what I usually do, so if you want to see more, let me know down in the comments, and I will see y'all next time.